Welcome back. This is the last webinar of the summit, and the topic is startup opportunities and go-to-market in ASEAN. Our guest speakers will discuss the prospects, threats, go-to-market strategies, as well as how policies support startups in expanding into ASEAN cities. We are grateful to have invited Mr. Robert Lomnitz, Managing Partner of Expedite Capital Venture, Thailand. He has been investing capital into early-stage businesses and emerging and frontier markets for over 20 years, having started his career as a lawyer on Wall Street. Mr. Sheng Yun Lee, Director of ETO Bangkok, HKSAR Government. He has served in various bureaux and departments such as Healthcare Planning and Development Office of the Food and Health Bureau, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development, and was the Assistant Commissioner for Tourism. Mr. Nicholas Ho, Chairman of HPA, Hong Kong representative to the APEC Business Advisory Council, also an award-winning architect. He expanded HPA with a strong presence in Southeast Asia, establishing a practice, HPA Design Studio SE Asia SDN BHD, headquartered in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Last but not least, we have our moderator, Mr. John Mack, co-founder of Community, Hong Kong, Myanmar. John, please.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Regional InnoTech Summit brought to you by EntreLink and the Hong Kong Productivity Council. I'm John Mack, your moderator for this panel on startup opportunities and go-to-market in ASEAN. In this session, we hope to get a deep dive into practical know-how of navigating this dynamic yet diverse region. Joining us today are three distinguished leaders bringing together three unique perspectives from business, investment, and government. Our first panelist is Robert Lomnitz. Robert is an investor with over 20 years of experience investing in early-stage companies. He's been working and investing in Southeast Asia since 2015, and he's a director of the Bangkok Venture Club and a partner and CEO at Expedite Capital.
Morning, everyone.
Morning. Our next panelist is Mr. Sheng Yun Lee, the director of the Hong Kong Government's Economic and Trade Office in Bangkok. The office was officially launched and opened in 2019 as part of the government's efforts to strengthen economic ties with ASEAN and to support and promote Hong Kong business and startup opportunities.
Good morning.
Last but not least, Mr. Nicholas Ho is an award-winning architect and executive chairman of HPA. Nick was instrumental in bringing his firm to Southeast Asia. He's a representative of Hong Kong to the APEC Business Advisory Council, and his footprint spans across Singapore, the Philippines, Malaysia, and beyond. So welcome all.
Thank you.
So before we talk about the actual know-how of or advice of doing business in ASEAN, I wanted to sort of get to know a little bit more about the three of you. Perhaps I could invite you to share the why and how, the motivation of you first landing into ASEAN. Nick, maybe let's start with you. Your firm was obviously a well-established firm in Hong Kong. What made you decide to expand to ASEAN in the first place? And how did you navigate that from inception?
So our firm is about a 40 years old company doing architecture, master planning, a lot of consultancy and advisory services. And I think 35 years ago, we opened the China market. So we had office in Singapore, Beijing, Nanjing, Chongqing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And about 20 to 30 years ago, we had an office in Singapore and Thailand, but then we closed them down during the 1997 Southeast Asia crisis. And we revisit Southeast Asia, ASEAN, as part of the Belt and Road Initiative promotion. And then we went about 6-7 years ago to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Singapore. And I think through that, experience, it really opened our eyes, and we feel like we can create new opportunity, new projects in this region and replicate similar success we had in Hong Kong, China, and also previously, other overseas countries into the ASEAN area region. So I think that's the reason that we want to export our services. We see there are very similar growth curve that happened, compared to China 30 years ago or Hong Kong 50 years ago.
Wonderful. I'll come back to you shortly about your interesting story. Robert, similarly, my understanding is that you have been working in Wall Street and London for many years, but you decided to, shall we say, venture into Southeast Asia, around 2015. What made you decide to shift your focus, and how were you able to establish yourself in this region?
Actually, John, even though I've been, largely based in the US and the UK for most of my career, my investment focus has actually always been on emerging markets. So while in the UK, my main focus was investing in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And, one of the things that attracts me to emerging markets and attracted me to Southeast Asia is that I found over the course of my investment career that markets that are going through relatively dramatic and fast-paced change lend themselves to value creation opportunities, all right? So markets that tend to be going through very quick political, socioeconomic, or technology change very often provide opportunities to invest and create, better than average risk-adjusted returns. All right. What particularly appealed to me about Southeast Asia, certainly prior to the COVID-19 crisis, was fairly strong GDP growth compared to the rest of the world, a very high rate of internet and mobile penetration, which lends itself to developing technology and innovation-driven enterprises, and a very growing middle class whose socioeconomic and demographic profile was changing. All right. So again, all of those things I think lend themselves to a good environment for early stage investment.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. For sharing your thoughts. I want to come to Sheng Yun.
Yes.
I already mentioned in my introduction of your mandate that the office was formally opened in 2019. But actually before that, the Hong Kong government has always had a presence in Singapore. Could you spend a few minutes to explain the government thinking behind setting up a second office in ASEAN? Why create your office when there's already one? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, actually, my office is the 13th office of the Overseas Economic and Trade Office, representing the Hong Kong government in overseas countries. My office is actually it's not the second, we are the third one. Since now in ASEAN region, we have 3 offices, one in Singapore, second one, which was set up 5 years ago in Jakarta, and the third one is my office in Thailand. I guess it just represents a rebalancing or a more proper reflection of how the commerce and business relations of Hong Kong to other economies. Now, as I've said, we have 13 offices, 4 of them are in Europe, and 4 of them in the North Americas, and we have 3 here in ASEAN, and also another one in Japan and one in Australia. So this actually reflects quite a balanced view of the Hong Kong government, which is corresponding to our business relationship with different parts of the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. And any plans of further expanding in having a 4th office in the region?
Now we are in the process to have one more office in Dubai, in the Middle East. The initial setup team has been there and they are working on that. But since there is a COVID, we cannot open it as soon as we want to. But hopefully when the COVID subsides, and most likely that office in Middle East will start very soon.
Wonderful, wonderful, great. Thank you. So now let's dive into sort of looking at the region as a whole. According to a 2019 report by the World Bank, in terms of ease of doing business, Singapore is ranked second, followed by Malaysia ranked 15 and Thailand ranked 27. All of this seem to indicate the ASEAN region as a whole is gaining traction and popularity among startups. I know Robert has already spoken to some of the competitive edges of the region, but would the three of you perhaps share a few thoughts on what makes this region stand out? Why is it such an attractive market for startups around the world? Perhaps we could start with Sheng Yun.
Yes, so thanks again. Thanks, John, for providing the opportunity. And I would like to take this opportunity first to thank you, the Hong Kong Productivity Council, and also the EntreLink for organizing this timely webinar on the development of startups in the region. Indeed, according to ASEAN guidelines on fostering a vibrant economy for startups across Southeast Asia, which was issued a few months ago in October 2020, there were at least 5,800 active startups. They're operating across all major verticals in the ASEAN region, including e-commerce, fintech, enterprise solution, big data, and consumer goods and services. So why the startups are doing so actively, so good here in ASEAN region? I guess there are three major reasons, three major policy in government or intergovernment level. The first one is the Belt and Road Initiative, which started in 2013 by the Chinese government. And since its introduction, the initiative does help accelerate the shift in global supply chains. Notably, ASEAN's exports have increased by some 30%, and ASEAN and China has become each other's top trading partner. This booming development in trade provides much more opportunities for startups in the area of e-commerce, e-payment, insurtech, logistics, warehousing, supporting services, etc. Another development brought about by this Belt and Road Initiative is the increase in infrastructure investment in ASEAN. China has indeed signed various contracts which worth more than $90 billion with East Asian region. The highest contract are awarded to the Indonesia, Malaysia, and Laos. And also, China has pledged to over $1.5 billion in preferential loans and also $10 billion in credits to 5 Mekong River countries. The Mekong River countries involve Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, and also Thailand. They support their development of infrastructure, improve the connectivity, propel the production capacity, etc. And this is the Belt and Road Initiative. The second major intergovernment policy is the Industry 4.0. This is advocated by the ASEAN country. Then the ASEAN group, they want to refer to the widespread integration of information and communication technology in industrial manufacturing. While the ASEAN members, they have different strengths and level of development in manufacturing. They issued in November 2019 a statement which is titled as ASEAN Declaration on Industrial Transformation to the Industry 4.0. This statement underlines ASEAN commitment to accelerate ASEAN transformation to Industry 4.0 with special focus on startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, e-government, smart cities, and vocational educations. Country-wise, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam are the forerunners in ASEAN towards Industry 4.0. They have developed detailed strategy and roadmap to improve the competitiveness of their local manufacturers. Accordingly, startups can work with the local manufacturers and provide them with a wide range of services, including automation, robotics, 3D printing, industrial Internet of Things. So after Belt and Road Initiative and also Industry 4.0, the third intergovernmental major policy which is coming is the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is a agreement signed among all 10 ASEAN members and 5 of their FTA partners. They are all major trading countries in Australia, China, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. The agreement was signed on 15 November 2020, which is a few months ago. And this is the world's largest free trade agreement, which covers a market of 2.2 billion people, 30% of world's population, with a combined GDP of 26.2 trillion US, which is also equivalent to around 30% of the global GDP. The RCEP is a modern, comprehensive, and high-quality FTA that delivers mutual benefits. It will broaden the market access in goods, service, and investment among RCEP participating economies and gradually harmonize their rules of origin, custom procedures, and technical standards. It will also enhance the division of labor and cooperation in production among members, expand and upgrade the regional consumer market, and further develop regional industrial supply and value chains. RCEP will create a legally binding framework in the region on trade policy, investment, intellectual property, e-commerce, and disputes settlement, contributing to creating a fair trade environment across the region. This rosy future is expected to attract more startups to come to the region to enjoy the benefits brought by the agreement. So, as I've said, there are 3 paradigm-changing major intergovernmental policy, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, Industry 4.0, and also the RCEP. I think they are the competitive edges that the ASEAN cities to its regional peers in attracting such startups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheng Yun, for talking about the sort of the macro landscape and a number of major intergovernmental achievements and projects that are poised to provide enormous opportunities for startups exploring operating in the region. I want to turn to Nick with a similar question, perhaps from a business perspective. Why ASEAN? You know, what makes ASEAN so competitive? On a sort of more micro scale, as if I were an entrepreneur, why would I want to consider this market?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of benefits. ASEAN, I think, apart from the sort of close geographical advantage, whereby anywhere in ASEAN from Hong Kong, you're talking about maximum 4 to 6 hours flight, you can reach every corner of ASEAN. ASEAN countries as a whole, although ASEAN has 10 countries, they operate with a lot of similarities because there's a lot of overseas Chinese that has been there for a very long time. So I think on certain industry and with certain companies and partnerships, there's a lot of common ground, similarities that they can work together with. And I think ASEAN is also very young, it's also very vibrant, it's emerging, and the infrastructure, whether it is physical or digital infrastructure, it's gradually developing. And that is leading to a large growth in the tech scene and also in the infrastructure development scene as well. So I think this reminds us what China was 30 years ago. But when we look closer into the market, it's actually have its difference as well. So there's 10 countries, but 4 countries basically have 70% of the population of ASEAN. And there are different culture, religion, local language, dialogues, so on. So there are differences and their own political cycle, election cycle, so on. But I think as a whole, it is still a high growth market. It still requires a lot of local partnerships, a lot of local experience and mitigation to control and assess your own risk. But as a market on its own, ASEAN is 40% of the population of China. Indonesia, it's around 40% of the ASEAN population, followed by Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, so on. So I think there is a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of business connectivity. There is a lot of positive competitions among different economies in that region as well, that really help expedite, push growth, especially for young startups. Thailand, I think, is one of the world most user-based or most used Facebook population in the world. I think ASEAN is growing with number of cell phone users and telecommunication providers and so on. So I think that tech scene leveraging on the infrastructure, whether it is Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or 4G, I think that scene is coming about very strongly, and COVID obviously expedited that process. I remember when I was in Thailand 3 to 5 years ago, a couple of companies that we invested in are in payments, and it's quite tricky because in Southeast Asia, majority of the people don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit cards, or they have no payment platforms. But through COVID, the adoption on payments has drastically increased, becoming less cash used as before. So I think these kind of changes really, together with the already, well-equipped infrastructure and advantages that these regions have, really expedite the growth. And we're very positive about the future of ASEAN collaborations.
Thank you for sharing that. Robert, I want to come to you. Actually, both Nick and Yus touched on this earlier. The idea of mobile penetration and the use of smartphones is a common scene across the entire region. Could you speak to perhaps to that point a little bit more on just to get for those who are not, for those watching this who are not as familiar with the region, a lot of very often we have assumptions that about whether a tech startup, whether now is the right time for a tech startup to enter the market. Does ASEAN have the potential to leapfrog, given that it's still a developing region, yet mobile penetration, as both of you attested to, seem to be growing at skyrocket rates? Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that as I mentioned earlier, the proliferation of mobile phones and the amount of the percentage of internet penetration in this region is extremely high. All right, and it's also a mobile first environment, which means that a lot of the people who are using these handheld devices did not go through the iteration of PC, laptop, mobile, like it happened in certain other markets for people of certainly my generation, all right? So what that means is that for innovation-driven enterprises that rely on, internet and mobile distribution of their products and services in order to reduce capital expenditure and grow quickly the way a startup is supposed to grow with a very efficient use of capital, that Southeast Asia is as a whole quite attractive, all right, because of that penetration, all right? That being said, I'm very much of the belief that there are certainly more differences between the ASEAN countries than there are similarities, all right? Yeah. It's much more like Western Europe before the single currency even, okay? So I think it's very dangerous to say what makes ASEAN cities attractive. Yangon is not as attractive as Singapore, right? Okay, and that's very much reflected in your rankings, where Singapore is 1, but Bangkok is what, 24th or 27th or whatever it is you said, okay? So let's look at what those real differences are, all right? The key things that you need, all right, other than market opportunity, which we've discussed, are, well, a great quality of life helps, okay? And that's another thing that's great across ASEAN. The weather's very nice, the food is very good, the people are lovely to deal with. So from a quality of life point of view, it ticks the boxes, right? Then you need really good infrastructure, right? Not just technology infrastructure, but you need rule of law, you need accountants, you need a regulatory environment that you can trust and that's not particularly corrupt and not influenceable. You need a very good source of talent. So you either need countries that have invested heavily in higher education and where there's a good local talent pool, or where the government allows you to import intellectual capital from other places. And you also need, a wall of risk capital available to fund these businesses, okay? And I think that each of the different ASEAN cities ranks extremely differently on those key criteria of access to capital, access to talent, regulatory environment, and infrastructure. And that's why you see a significant difference in the rankings, John.
Yes. Thank you for that. And actually, that is the perfect prelude to my next question, because we talked a lot about opportunities, potential, a very rosy picture. But all three of you have touched on, in my opinion, two issues. The first one is the sheer diversity there is across the region, across the 10 member states of ASEAN, in demographics, in culture, in political stability, in even ease of doing business. Could you elaborate perhaps in your respective regions, some of the major risks there are for, again, startups looking into exploring the region? What should they look out for, and what should they be cautious about? Again, maybe we could start with Sheng Yun. You talked about Sheng Yun. Obviously, your office covers beyond Bangkok. You cover three particular economies in ASEAN. What are some of the challenges, hurdles, or even threats or risks that an incoming startup may face if they want to land their foot in those countries under your portfolio?
I guess it is a very different world when comparing to Hong Kong or other Western countries, Western economies, because in this country, they have a very different history and cultural background, and their development process are at different stage of development. I would like to say for the countries, at least the countries under my purview in ASEAN, like Myanmar, Thailand, and Cambodia, I would always suggest for those who are interested, the first thing they need to do is they need to make some local friends. They need to have some local friends to understand the culture, understand how things work, understand the importance of relationship. I guess cultivating a friendship with local people of a like mind, with similar mindset in pursuing a ventures like in startups would be very important to make a good footing in these countries. And it will also help them to understand actually how the infrastructure or how the resources in this country can help their development. I would say that they are different, but they are in no way they are worse off than other places. It is just that we need to unearth their potential through cultivating friendship and make a good positioning for our strength in make sure that we can have a good synergies with the local resources so that we can come into some new products or new initiatives that will strive in these economies.
Wonderful. And Nick, coming to you, I wonder if you have, on the similar question, again, not talking about whether any economies are better or worse. I think that is for every startup to judge and to determine which is best suited for them, which market is best suited for them. But from your perspective, having landed in the region, Could you perhaps share some your experience and examples of some of the challenges when you first went into the markets and how you were able to overcome them? Were they regulatory? Were they making friends, as Sheng Yun said? Were they competing with local players? Would you be able to share on that?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think friendship or partnership is very, very important anywhere in the world doing business. So we started off our consultancy advisory business, went to Malaysia. So we previously, 25 years ago, we had an office in Singapore and Thailand. But then this time around, when we went back, we chose Malaysia because we have some local partners there. We have, worked with them in China and Hong Kong before. So it's a trusted relationship. And then we formed a company, and then we started doing business there. But then the sort of recession happened, like 5 years ago. And then so we used Malaysia as a base, pivot, and then we opened the entire ASEAN market from Singapore to Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, Indonesia, and so on, but using Malaysia as a base and to keep sort of our talent pool there and keep the cost low relatively. And that's how we did it. So we try to mitigate the risk by diversifying into more markets, but because our type of business is not very capex heavy, it's mostly just cash flow and human headcount. So for us, we're able to come up with a model that best fit our risk appetite and our market exposure. But I think for some of the startups that we helped and we invested in, it's very different because every market, if you have the best technology in education, or you have the best technology in food tech or in biotech, not every country will have the right market, price range, interest to adopt. And while you can create that market, it's probably best not to start with those first. And I think local partnership is also very important. If you look at countries outside of Singapore, majority of those countries, you require a local partner. In some cases, hold majority shares in a partnership. So finding a local partner is like it's harder than finding your wife, I think. It's very, very difficult. It's you have to be really, really lucky. I mean, we obviously have some painful examples on some bad partnerships, but we do have some successful ones. But I think this is not an ASEAN unique problem. We have similar issues in UK and China. We have similar issues in US as well. So I think for us, we always keep a lookout, But I think certain economies in ASEAN, to add on top of that, is that the information is not transparent. The market is not transparent. So you really need strong partnerships. You really need to have strong friends and on-ground knowledge yourself before making the bet, because the market is really, really not transparent. Compared with mainland, compared with Hong Kong and other developed countries. I think certain economies in ASEAN, it's highly restricted in that regard. But having said that, there's a huge growth market, and if you target the bigger population and if you have the right product type, you could be huge. And I think last week or a few days ago, UBS announced the SPAC deal with Grab, which is the largest SPAC deal in history. So you can tell, even a Southeast Asian company done right or doing right can be huge. Southeast Asia itself, I'm not saying that it's enough, but it is a sizable market on its own. It's not an add-on markets, like other Asian countries.
Thank you for that insightful sharing. Robert, similarly, are there stories of success, failures you might be able to share, or anecdotes, of mitigating risks, of overcoming, be it regulatory hurdles, be it adaptation, local adaptation? Any stories to share on that front that might be inspiring for our audience?
I would say a couple of things, although I think the key message that's already come out is you need to really have great local partners when you're going out of your home market into a new market that you don't understand as well. Okay. And even Grab, I'll give you an example. When Grab originally launched in Thailand, they did it as a joint venture with a local Thai family who really knew this environment and really understood the market and had access to the relationships and the regulatory and the government and all of the various other things that they needed. And of course, that family ended up doing extremely well as Grab then reacquired their interest and converted it into a holding company. But originally, Grab Thailand was a joint venture between Grab Singapore and a local group of investors and people who could bring value to that company. All right. I'd say just a couple of other things very specifically. A number of the areas we invest in are in regulated industries. Okay, so as Nick was mentioning, industries like fintech and insurtech and health tech and certain food tech, there are government agencies that regulate those products and services, whether it's the financial service authorities or the Food and Drug Administration or some other insurance regulatory body, etc. So really understanding the differences in the regulatory environment and whether your product or services are even allowed or how onerous the regulatory requirements are is a key point, right? And one thing I think that startup entrepreneurs do need to decide quite early is the market opportunity enough for them just in their own local market, or do they have to build a regional business in order to deliver some sort of investor return or investor value? And we much prefer a business that has a large enough addressable market domestically to make it a great opportunity, and then where the additional ASEAN expansion is all a bonus rather than an absolute key requirement of the initial business case. All right, because it's very hard to capture market share in multiple markets all at the same time. And most of the businesses we look at, there will be clones in other markets. IP is not as protectable as everybody thinks. And if you look at all of the successful ASEAN businesses, you can find a US or a Western European comp that they ripped off 3 or 4 years later before the US or the European comp managed to get its head around entering the Southeast Asian market, right? So speed to market is very important. And having speed to market in multiple geographies at the same time is very difficult for a startup to do, all right? So I personally think that, most of the really strong regional businesses will ultimately end up being the result of consolidation rather than organic growth. I think the well-funded companies in their verticals will buy the less well-funded local businesses that have local language skill, local relationships, local market share, and brand equity. I think that's a much easier thing to do than to expand purely organically.
I see. That's very interesting. And I think, with my own experience, I can attest to that. I think organic growth is much harder than it might sometimes appear. I think that's a very useful advice.
And maybe, John, if I can, I just give you one of my own horror stories, right? Fantastic. So I invested in a business in Thailand, which was in the online cashback space. It's an interesting model. There's a US comp called Ebates, which is a multi-billion-dollar business. There's a UK comp called Quidco, again, a multi-billion-dollar business. And it's a great opportunity for Southeast Asia, okay? I invested in a company in Thailand. The company had by far the leading technology platform, had a great team of people, but was unsuccessful in raising as much money as its Singapore competitor, all right? Which was in Singapore, where there is a much more significant amount of seed stage, early risk capital than there is at Thailand at the moment. And because that company, Shopback, raised a $2.5 million seed round and an $8 million Series A round, and we were sort of messing around with $500,000, the Thai business failed, and the Singapore business ended up rolling out across the region through acquisition. Unfortunately, not acquiring ours, but acquiring others in the geographies. Okay, so it's not always about who has the best product. It's about who gets the money the fastest, and then you can acquire your way to regional dominance.
Thank you. And on that note, I have a question specific for Sheng Yun. A lot has been said about the need for support. A lot has been. All three of you talked about the need for local partners, and sometimes it's by chance, sometimes it's by cultivation. And I think this is a part where the state, where government could potentially play a role in bringing making introductions, in offering initial thoughts on the market landscape, etc. Could you speak to a little bit about what support schemes, whether it's funding, whether it's any other sort of support that come via that are offered by your office to startups from Hong Kong looking into your region, and whether there are any examples, success, failures, in different any examples you may have of that work.
Yeah, thank you, John. When we talk about support, there are several areas. So today I would like to share with you on 3 areas: on funding support, on the ecosystem support, and also on our institutional support. There are 3 areas of support that the Hong Kong government is currently providing. As regards the funding support, because we think that for startups, this is very important for their growth and development, especially in particularly if they want to export their products and services overseas. So in order to support the startups to realize their vision, we have launched a number of funding programs. The first of that is we call the Bud Fund, which is the dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales. This Bud Fund provides funding support for individual Hong Kong enterprises to undertake projects to develop brands, upgrade and restructure their business operation, and to promote sales in economies such as ASEAN, so as to enhance their competitiveness and to facilitate their business development. The funding will be provided on a matching basis. That is, the government will cover a maximum of 50% of the total approved project cost. And the enterprise has to contribute no less than 50% of the total project cost. Each enterprise may obtain funding for a maximum of 40 approved projects, and the total accumulated funding amount would be 6 million Hong Kong dollar. Another marketing-related initiative is that the startups can make use of is the SME Export Marketing Fund. The SME Export Marketing Fund, we call it the EMF, which provides funding support for enterprises to participate in export promotion activities like trade fairs, business missions, placement of advertisement on trade publications, and etc. to promote their own products. And also we have the SME Loan Guarantee Scheme, which aims to help startups and SMEs to secure funding from financial institutions in Hong Kong so as to enhance their productivity and competitiveness. Under this scheme, the Hong Kong Mortgage Corp Limited may provide guarantee coverage up to 90% to the credit facilities of eligible enterprises approved by the lenders. So this is the funding support side. And how about the ecosystem support? In addition to this, the Hong Kong government has established the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks and also the Cyberport. They are the incubators to nurture new startups for Hong Kong. Since the Science and Technology Parks establishment in 2002, they have cultivated successful I&T companies, formed strong local and international networks, and created a thriving community with the institution. In particular, the Science and Technology Park has incubated over 770 graduates from its programs, with nearly 80% of these graduates still in business. Besides, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks also co-invest through their own venture fund with angel investors or venture capital funds to nurture early stage technology startups, giving local talents the opportunity to make an impact on the world. Since this fund's establishment in 2015, they have invested in 13 projects with an asset under their management over 600 million Hong Kong dollar. As regards the Cyberport, they have over 1,650 startups and technology companies, mainly in the areas of fintech, smart living, digital entertainment, esports, and cybersecurity. With the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks and the Cyberport as cradles, they would help unleash the innovation potential in startups and enterprises in Hong Kong and assist them to expand to different parts of the world, including the ASEAN. So thirdly, about the institutional support, just like I suggest in the earlier, in the beginning of this, in this webinar, our office is the 13th Economic and Trade Office representing the Hong Kong government. And indeed in ASEAN, we also have Singapore and Jakarta, so we have 3 offices here. One of our major duties is to promote Hong Kong's economic and trade interests in the region. We will collect and disseminate information on major policy and legislation, and also the latest economic developments in the region. Furthermore, we will also assist in organizing business missions to the region. To take my office as an example, in the first year in our establishment in 2019, we have assisted the Hong Kong Productivity Council, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks, and also the Cyberport in arranging visits of 3 startup-related business delegations to Bangkok. So hopefully with this funding support, ecosystem support, and also institutional support, the startups in Hong Kong would be better prepared and they will be better facilitated in expanding into ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheng Yun, a really quick follow-up, just out of curiosity. Have because I'm really excited by the vibe, the dynamism that is coming out of your office, and the fact that you have been so instrumental in playing the role as a facilitator between Hong Kong startups and in navigating the Thai markets. I'm curious, from the 3 delegations, at least to your knowledge, were there any parties on those delegations who have been able to follow up and whether it's successful or not is another matter, but have been able to explore the market and lend their foot in the region?
I would say that for the 3 delegations, some of them, they already have some presence in Thailand, and through the delegations, they strengthen their presence and they make a lot more relationship and friends. And some of them are still in exploration process. We are a little bit unfortunate because after all those delegations, it's only 3 or 4 months later, the COVID strike us. So we cannot see each other anymore for the last 16 months. So we can only through the Zoom communication on the online platform. But I'm pretty sure actually when the sky reopened again, our connections will strive again. There will be a lot more concrete development on a large number of cases.
Fantastic. We have around 10 minutes, and you touched on COVID. And before I wrap up the session, I want to ask Nick and Robert on their take on the new normal. Obviously, we are still. It's not a past tense. We shouldn't refer to COVID in past tense. It's still an ongoing crisis. But I think Nick earlier alluded to this already, to some of the changes in the landscape, and for example, a cash-based society is forced into accepting your e-wallets, payment systems, etc. But could each of you, Nick and Robert, speak a little bit on your observations of how, well, number one, how has COVID impacted the startup ecosystems in the region, and second of all, whether you are seeing signs or examples of adaptation to it. Maybe we'll start with Robert.
Yeah, I think COVID has obviously had an impact on both startup creation, appetite for investors to put money out the door in a world where the future is not particularly foreseeable or forecastable. And certainly startups in certain narrow industry sectors like travel and tourism have been, absolutely decimated if they didn't have, significant cash on the balance sheet. That being said, the positive factors are that if you're a health tech startup, if you're in the business of selling through e-commerce, where people have just had to get used to not visiting physical stores, if you're in fintech payment processing or wealth management services, there's a lot of businesses that have actually benefited from the COVID-19 situation. Unfortunately, a lot of them are very large companies like Amazon and Google, and SMEs have been absolutely devastated by the crisis. But in terms of the technology environment, I think that you're seeing capital is coming back into the market. And you're also seeing an expansion of interest out of just pure fintech and prop tech and ed tech and some of the things that this webinar or this series of webinar focuses on, into other interesting sectors like health tech and telemedicine, food and wellness, food tech and wellness products, and a whole variety of other things that I think are interesting and form a part of whatever this new normal is going to end up looking like.
And you think, just a quick follow-up, and you think these trends extend well beyond Western Europe and Greater China into ASEAN. So you see the same keen interest in those health tech in the region beyond Western Europe and Greater China. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the evidence of that is in Thailand particularly, you need to watch what the big corporates are doing and who's launching corporate venture capital funds. And what you saw was it all started with the banks, and then it moved into prop tech, and then it was Industry 4.0. And what you're now seeing is a number of the big hospital groups are getting interested in corporate venture capital and investing in innovation and telemedicine. You're even seeing some of the big corporate groups like CP investing into health tech because they see that they can distribute it to their customer base without actually needing to invest in clinics. We have been very involved in a program called the Space F program, which is now in its second year, which is the largest and pretty much only food tech accelerator in the region, sponsored by Thai Union Food Group and Thai Bev, just to plug a few of our Thai corporates. So yeah, I think there's real evidence that the interest in startups is not just in, the fintech space or food delivery services or, the other likely suspects.
Sure. Thank you. Nick, do you share Robert's view on on the opportunities of COVID, of the COVID crisis in the region?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think fintech or health tech, e-commerce. I think these are very solid bedrock of Southeast Asia tech scene now. And I think going forward with that infrastructure in mind, probably there will be another pandemic also down the line. I think these things would probably flourish even more. So I think those are the sectors that we're quite comfortable with. I think on top of that is in Southeast Asia, I think, or in the world really, post-COVID, it's not going to be back to pre-COVID. Like we all have to have an understanding that global travel would not grow at the same rate as it did before, because certain meetings will be replaced by Zoom or by a phone call. But the total business travel or social or tourism travel market will not be replaced by Zoom, that's for sure. Yeah. But we have to understand that if the growth is slower or even reduced or start to reduce back to pre-COVID days in a peak and then gradually on a decline, that's already an alarm to a lot of businesses. Where are they going in the future? And I think not just a global travel or Zoom relationship, there are a lot of business out there that will be affected forever. So a company that we invested in called Prenetics, they do a healthcare diagnostic test. So the disruption is really to take out the hospital and clinic where people can order the test online. They can send you the kit at home and you can do a body check at home. Basically, it's a body check at home. You get your lab report through an app, PDF, and then you get like a doctor call you to explain your body check for you. So these kind of businesses are now disrupting the new norm and at a faster rate. So it will never be the same again. I think, and that's something that we all have to understand. I look at exhibitions, right? Exhibitions, roadshow, trade shows, huge market in Asia, huge in Hong Kong and China. But post-COVID, it won't be as big as before. Then what happens to all the physical space for MICE? What happens to the conference hall, to the stadium hall? What happened to those? There will be a crave for physical contact, but the total volume, the way that I see it, is probably on a decline.
Thank you, Nick. That was very good, and I have to declare my interest as a beneficiary of Prenetics. I have to attest to the good service it is doing for Hong Kong. So kudos to you. So we have around just 3 minutes before this session concludes. Can I invite our panelists to each perhaps offer any concluding remarks you may have. Perhaps as a prompt, if there's one piece of advice you may want, you think the prospective startup entrepreneurs wanting to expand into ASEAN are thinking about, ought to think about, and what would that be? Would you be able to offer that? Maybe start with Sheng Yun.
Since my office is in Thailand, in Bangkok, I would like to say Bangkok has always been the most well-connected places with Hong Kong. So I guess we should look beyond to coming to Thailand just for tourism, but we can have a lot more opportunity for startups in Hong Kong. So please come to have a look. When the site reopen again, the flights we will have one flight every hour between Bangkok and Hong Kong.
Fantastic, fantastic. And your office stands ready to welcome any.
Of course, please come, please give me a call. Yeah, we are very well. We like to receive anyone from Hong Kong. We provide the facilitation and support as required.
Wonderful, thank you, Sheng Yun. And Nick, what would the one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think recently I've been talking to a mentor of mine, and I said, "Oh, Southeast Asia right now, COVID, it's a tough market. I think part of some of our business line, I think we'll focus in Hong Kong or GBA." And then I think that mentor yelled at me for like an hour. He said, "It's because it is where it is right now. there are a lot of opportunities at a lot of great terms and great prices. If you don't do it now, when is the best time to do it? So I think there's no right time to do things. And if you think that, oh, the world is crumbling down, that's probably the best time to do it. So I think now is a better time than any time than, now's the time to do it.
That's a very encouraging message. Thank you, Nick. And Robert, last but not least, what would your 10 cent, or your 2 cent be for any prospective entrepreneurs?
You just discounted me by 80%, John. It started at 10 cents and now it's 2 cents.
I don't quite know what the right expression is, whether it's 10 or 2,
Okay.
but either way,
Well,
your invaluable piece of advice. Put it this.
I think there's 2 things I would say. First of all, do some homework, all right? There's a huge amount of data available out there. So don't be surprised if the regulatory environment is stricter or the price points aren't the same. I mean, Nick's point earlier, which is that your product or service just may not be desirable in one of these countries. Figure out where your opportunities are by doing some homework would be point number 1. And I think then point number 2 is go visit Shengyi, because if your government is providing the level of support that the Hong Kong government is providing you on all of these various levels of financing and trade shows and intragovernmental and institutional support, you would be absolutely nuts not to avail yourself of that and really utilize that to your best ability. Because I can tell you, not all of the ASEAN governments are providing that sort of support to their startups to get out of ASEAN and into Hong Kong or the GBA, all right? And a lot of the ASEAN governments could learn a lot from the Hong Kong government's initiatives in these areas, I would argue.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All very encouraging messages and very insightful. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you all for watching this. I hope you've learned a thing or two. And if you are considering, if you're looking at the markets, I hope you seriously do your homework and consider where to land your foot. I want to thank all 3 of our panelists for joining today and for sharing your however many cents, your advice for our audience. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, and all precious guests for providing all valuable and insightful thoughts. Those are really encouraging messages. We got to know the insight of the prospect, opportunities or threats in the ASEAN cities under the new normal, and also the solution of stepping into and surviving in these markets. I bet startups are now more familiar with and may consider expanding business in ASEAN in the future. Though the webinars and startup presentations are all finished today, participants who are curious and interested to know how our government supports SMEs, you must stay and listen to the final session at 3:15 p.m. that provides the information of funding sources available for SME at this moment and in the future. So stay tuned and we'll see you at 3:15 p.m.